I always thought paranoia was something that happened to other people. The kind of thing you read about in late-night forums, or hear whispered in the back of a bar, someone's friend of a friend who swears their landlord is watching them, or that the government is listening through the walls. I used to laugh at those stories. I used to think I was above that kind of fear. But that was before the cameras. Before I learned what it really means to be watched. It started with a letter. Not a real letter, not the kind you can hold in your hand and tear up if you don't like what it says. This was an email, sent at 2:13 a.m., from the management company that owned my building. The subject line was, "Important notice, scheduled maintenance." I almost deleted it without reading. I get a dozen of those a month, reminders to change my air filter, warnings about water shutoffs, the usual noise of city living. But something about the time it was sent made me pause. Who schedules maintenance in the middle of the night? I opened it. The message was short, almost too short. Dear resident, as part of our ongoing commitment to safety and security, we will be installing new monitoring equipment in all units. Please ensure access to your apartment on Thursday between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Thank you for your cooperation. That was it. No explanation, no details, not even a signature. Just a faceless notice, dropped into my inbox like a stone in a well. I stared at the screen for a long time. Monitoring equipment. The words felt heavy, clinical, like something you'd hear in a hospital or a prison. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe they were putting in new smoke detectors, or carbon monoxide alarms. Maybe it was just another layer of bureaucracy, some insurance requirement that would be forgotten in a week. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Why would they need access to every apartment? Why call it monitoring equipment instead of just saying what it was? I tried to sleep that night, but the question kept circling in my mind. I imagined men in uniforms, carrying toolboxes and clipboards, moving from door to door with practiced efficiency. I imagined them opening my closet, peering under my bed, leaving something behind that I wouldn't notice until it was too late. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself I'd laugh about it in the morning. Thursday came. I left for work early, locking the door behind me with a little more care than usual. I spent the day in a fog, checking my phone every hour for updates that never came. When I got home, the hallway smelled faintly of dust and ozone, the way it does after someone's been drilling into the walls. My door was unlocked. I froze, keys halfway to the lock, heart pounding in my chest. I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting to find someone still inside. But the apartment was empty. Everything looked the same, at first. The couch, the coffee table, the stack of dishes in the sink I'd meant to wash before I left. But as I walked through the rooms, I started to notice small changes. The rug in the living room was slightly off-center. The bathroom door was open when I always left it closed. And in the corner of the ceiling, just above the bookshelf, a small black dome stared down at me with a single, unblinking eye. I stood there for a long time, staring back at it. It was a camera. There was no mistaking it. The kind you see in banks or convenience stores, half hidden behind tinted glass. I looked around, searching for more. There was another in the kitchen, tucked above the fridge. A third in the hallway, angled to catch the front door. Each one perfectly placed, each one silent and still. I felt a cold wave of anger rise in my chest. I hadn't agreed to this. No one had asked my permission. I grabbed my phone and dialed the management company, fingers shaking with adrenaline. The line rang twice before a recorded voice answered. Thank you for calling. All representatives are currently assisting other customers. Please leave a message after the tone. I hung up without speaking. I spent the rest of the evening pacing the apartment, trying to decide what to do. I thought about covering the cameras, but I didn't know if that would make things worse. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? My landlord put cameras in my apartment? It sounded crazy, even to me. I tried to ignore them, to pretend they weren't there, but every time I moved, I felt their gaze on my skin. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, felt amplified, as if the apartment itself was listening. I dreamed of red lights blinking in the dark, of voices whispering just out of reach. When I woke, the sun was already high, and the cameras were still there, watching. Days passed. I tried to go about my life, but nothing felt normal. I started to notice things I'd never paid attention to before, the way the mailman lingered at the door, the way my neighbors avoided eye contact in the hallway. I wondered if they had cameras too, if they were just as afraid as I was. I tried to talk to them, but no one wanted to listen. Everyone was busy, everyone had somewhere to be. I started to keep a journal, writing down everything I saw, everything I felt. It was the only way I could make sense of what was happening. I wrote about the cameras, about the email, about the way the management company never answered their phone. I wrote about the dreams, the sense of being watched, the feeling that something was wrong, deeply wrong, in a way I couldn't explain. One night, as I was writing, I heard a noise in the hallway. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on a door 3 floors away. I froze, pen hovering above the page. The tapping grew louder, closer, until it stopped just outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of a key in the lock, for footsteps on the carpet. But there was nothing. Just silence, thick and heavy, pressing in from all sides. I waited for what felt like hours, but no one came. Eventually, I forced myself to move, to check the peephole. The hallway was empty. I went back to my desk, but the words wouldn't come. I sat there, staring at the blank page, feeling the weight of the cameras on my back. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. For a moment, I thought it was the management company finally calling me back, but when I checked the screen, it was a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring, watching the seconds tick by, until it stopped. A minute later, a text arrived: "Is everything all right in your unit? Please confirm." No name, no signature, just that single line. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Was this someone from the building? A neighbor? Or was it connected to the cameras? I typed out a reply: "Who is this?" But before I could hit send, another message appeared. "We noticed some unusual activity last night. Please respond." My hands went cold. Unusual activity. Had they seen me pacing, writing in my journal, checking the peephole? I looked up at the camera in the corner, its black lens reflecting the morning light. I didn't reply. Instead, I got dressed and left the apartment, locking the door behind me. The hallway felt different now, as if the walls themselves were listening. I passed Mrs. Patel from 4B on the stairs, her eyes darting away from mine. I wanted to ask her if she'd gotten the same messages, if she had cameras in her apartment too, but the words stuck in my throat. She hurried past, clutching her grocery bag like a shield. Outside, the city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled down the street, horns blared in the distance, and people moved with the practiced indifference of urban life. I walked for blocks, trying to clear my head, but the feeling of being watched followed me like a shadow. Every window seemed to hold a hidden observer, every passing car a potential threat. I found myself at a coffee shop I'd never been to before, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the world go by. I pulled out my phone and searched for information about my building, the management company, anything that might explain what was happening. But all I found were generic websites, stock photos of smiling families, and vague promises of modern amenities and state-of-the-art security. I tried searching for the company's name along with the word cameras, but nothing came up. No news articles, no complaints, nothing. It was as if I was the only one who'd noticed. I scrolled through forums, looking for stories like mine, but every thread ended the same way: people dismissing the idea as paranoia, or telling the poster to move out if they didn't like it. I finished my coffee and headed back, feeling more alone than ever. When I reached my building, I hesitated at the door, half expecting to see someone waiting for me. But the lobby was empty, the security desk unmanned. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, listening for footsteps behind me, but heard only the echo of my own. Back in my apartment, I checked the cameras again. They were still there, silent and unmoving. I tried to ignore them, to go about my day as if nothing had changed, but every movement felt scrutinized. I found myself moving differently, avoiding certain parts of the room, keeping my back to the wall whenever possible. That afternoon, I got another email from the management company. This one was even shorter than the last: reminder, tampering with monitoring equipment is strictly prohibited. Violations will result in penalties. No explanation, no contact information, just a warning. I felt a surge of anger, but also fear. How did they know I'd even considered tampering with the cameras? Were they watching me in real time? I decided to test it. I stood in front of the camera in the living room and waved. Nothing happened. I made a face, stuck out my tongue, even flipped it off. Still nothing. I waited, heart pounding, but no messages came, no knocks at the door. I started to feel foolish, like a child daring a monster to come out from under the bed. But that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard the tapping again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. 3 sharp knocks, then silence. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but as I watched, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, gone before I could focus on it. I went back to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city outside. I thought about the cameras, about the messages, about the way my life had changed in just a few days. I wondered if I was losing my mind, if the stress was making me see things that weren't there. The next morning, I woke to find a slip of paper pushed under my door. It was blank, except for a single word written in neat, block letters, watching. My hands shook as I picked it up. I looked out into the hallway, but there was no one there. I checked the cameras, but they showed nothing out of the ordinary. I called the management company again, but got the same recorded message. I left a voicemail this time, my voice trembling as I demanded an explanation. I told them I knew about the cameras, about the messages, about the note. I told them I wanted answers. But when I hung up, I knew I wouldn't get any. That day, I started to notice other things. My mail was late, or missing entirely. Packages I'd been expecting never arrived. My internet connection slowed to a crawl, dropping out at random intervals. I called the service provider, but they said everything was fine on their end. I started to wonder if someone was interfering, if the cameras were just the beginning. I tried to talk to my neighbors again, but no one wanted to listen. Some pretended not to hear me, others just shook their heads and hurried away. I saw Mrs. Patel again, her eyes red and tired. I asked her if she'd gotten any strange messages, if she'd noticed anything unusual. She looked at me for a long moment, then whispered, "Don't ask questions. It's safer that way." Then she closed her door and locked it behind her. That night, I dreamed of cameras. Endless rows of them, lining every wall, every ceiling, every corner. Each one turned to follow me as I moved, their lenses unblinking, their gaze cold and mechanical. I woke in a cold sweat, heart racing, the word "watching" echoing in my mind. I started to keep my curtains closed at all hours, even during the day. The sunlight felt like an invitation, a way for the cameras to see me more clearly, to record every detail of my life. I unplugged my smart TV, covered my laptop's webcam with tape, and turned my phone off whenever I was home. But it didn't matter. The cameras in the ceiling were always there, always watching. I tried to distract myself with work, with errands, with anything that would keep me out of the apartment. But every time I came home, the sense of unease returned, stronger than before. I started to notice things I'd missed before, the faint hum of electricity in the walls, the way the lights flickered when I walked into a room, the subtle click of a relay switching on somewhere behind the drywall. It was as if the apartment itself was alive, responding to my presence. One evening, as I was making dinner, I heard a faint buzzing sound coming from the kitchen camera. I turned to look, and for a split second, I thought I saw the lens move, tracking my motion as I crossed the room. I froze, spatula in hand, staring back at the black dome. The buzzing stopped. I waited, heart pounding, but nothing else happened. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that the camera was fixed in place, but the doubt lingered. That night, I decided to do some research. I stayed up late, scrolling through forums and message boards, looking for anyone who had experienced something similar. Most of what I found was conspiracy theories and urban legends, stories about landlords spying on tenants, about hidden microphones and secret rooms. But buried among the noise, I found a post that caught my attention. It was from someone who claimed to have lived in my building years ago. They described the same cameras, the same sense of being watched, the same strange messages and missing mail. Their post ended abruptly, with a warning: "If you're reading this, get out while you still can. They don't want you to know what's really going on." I read the post over and over, trying to make sense of it. Who were they? What didn't they want me to know? I tried to find more posts from the same user, but their account had been deleted. I copied the text into my journal, just in case it disappeared too. The next day, I decided to take action. I bought a small step ladder and a roll of black electrical tape. When I got home, I climbed up and tried to cover the camera in the living room. As soon as the tape touched the lens, my phone buzzed with a new message: tampering detected. Please refrain from obstructing the monitoring equipment. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone what I was doing. The only way they could have known was if they were watching in real time. I ripped the tape off and climbed down, my hands shaking. I looked around the room, half expecting someone to burst through the door. But nothing happened. The camera stared back at me, silent and unblinking. That night, I heard the tapping again. This time, it was accompanied by a low, mechanical whirring, like a hard drive spinning up. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening as the sound moved from room to room, always just out of sight. I tried to tell myself it was just the building settling, or the pipes rattling in the walls, but I knew better. The next morning, I found another note under my door. This one was longer, written in the same neat, block letters: "We see you. We hear you. We know what you're doing." I crumpled it up and threw it away, but the words stayed with me all day. I started to notice changes in my routine. My alarm clock would go off at odd hours, even when I hadn't set it. The water in the shower would turn cold without warning. My favorite mug disappeared from the kitchen, only to reappear days later in the bathroom. It was as if someone was trying to unsettle me, to make me doubt my own memory. I tried to talk to my friends about what was happening, but they didn't believe me. They told me I was overreacting, that I was just stressed, that I needed to get out more. I wanted to scream at them, to make them understand, but I knew it was useless. No one believes you when you say you're being watched. Not until it happens to them. One night, I decided to test the cameras again. I wrote a note on a piece of paper: "Why are you watching me?" I held it up to the camera in the living room and waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing happened. I started to feel foolish, like I was talking to a wall. But the next morning, I found a reply taped to my front door. It was a single word, written in the same block letters: safety. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it. Safety for whom? For me? For the building? Or for someone else entirely? I started to pay closer attention to the people in my building. The maintenance workers who came and went at odd hours, always carrying toolboxes and walkie-talkies. The security guards who never seemed to look you in the eye. The neighbors who moved in and out without ever introducing themselves. I wondered if they were all part of it, if they knew more than they let on. I began to keep a record of their comings and goings, jotting down times and dates in my journal. I noticed patterns: certain workers always appeared after the cameras buzzed, certain neighbors always left their apartments at the same time every night. It was as if the building was following a script, each person playing their part. The more I watched, the more I realized how little I knew about the people around me. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home, an intruder in someone else's story. The cameras were just the beginning. There was something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface, and I was determined to find out what it was. I started to notice the patterns in the building's routines, the way the lights in the hallway flickered on and off at the same times every night, the way the elevator always seemed to stop on the third floor even when no one was there. I began to wonder if the cameras were only the surface, if there was a whole network of surveillance running through the walls, tracking every movement, every sound. One evening, I decided to test my theory. I waited until midnight, when the building was quiet and the city outside had settled into its restless sleep. I crept into the hallway, notebook in hand, and listened. At first, there was nothing but the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog. But as I stood there, I began to hear it, a faint, rhythmic clicking, like the sound of a relay switching on and off. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the walls and floors. I followed the sound down the hallway, past the elevator, past the laundry room, until I reached the door to the basement. It was usually locked, but tonight it stood slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. I hesitated, heart pounding, then pushed the door open and stepped inside. The basement was colder than I expected, the air thick with the smell of dust and old concrete. The only light came from a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the floor. I moved slowly, careful not to make a sound. The clicking was louder here, more insistent, coming from behind a metal door at the far end of the room. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. I could hear voices, muffled, indistinct, but definitely human. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost frantic. I tried the handle, but it was locked tight. I considered knocking, but something told me that would be a mistake. I backed away, careful not to let the door slam behind me. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner, a small, red light, blinking steadily. I moved closer and saw that it was attached to a camera, identical to the ones in my apartment. It was pointed directly at the door, its lens glinting in the dim light. I hurried back upstairs, my mind racing. Who was meeting in the basement at midnight? What were they talking about? And why did they need a camera to watch the door? I wrote everything down in my journal, every detail I could remember. I knew I was getting closer to the truth, but I also knew I was putting myself at risk. The next day, I noticed a change in the building's atmosphere. The maintenance workers were more visible, moving in pairs, speaking in hushed tones. The security guards lingered in the lobby, watching everyone who came and went. I felt their eyes on me as I passed, their gazes lingering a little too long. That afternoon, I received another message, this time slipped under my door in a plain white envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed in the same block letters as before: "Stop asking questions." No signature, no explanation, just a warning. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone knew what I was doing. Someone was watching me more closely than ever. I considered leaving, packing a bag and disappearing in the middle of the night. But something held me back. I needed answers. I needed to know why they had installed the cameras, why they were watching us, what they were hiding in the basement. I couldn't walk away, not now. That night, I stayed up late, watching the feed from the hallway camera on my phone. I had found a way to access it through a backdoor in the building's Wi-Fi, a trick I'd picked up from one of the forums. The image was grainy, but I could make out the shapes of people moving through the halls, their faces obscured by shadows. At 2:17 a.m., I saw two figures enter the hallway, both dressed in dark clothing, their heads down. They moved quickly, stopping outside my door. One of them reached into their pocket and pulled out a small device, pressing it against the lock. The door clicked open, and they slipped inside. I froze, watching in horror as the feed went black. I waited, heart pounding, for what felt like an eternity. When the image finally returned, the hallway was empty, my door closed. I rushed to the living room, searching for any sign that someone had been there. Everything looked the same, but I could feel the difference, a subtle shift in the air, a sense of intrusion. I checked the cameras, but they showed nothing unusual. I checked my belongings, but nothing was missing. It was as if they had come and gone without leaving a trace. I sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. Why had they come into my apartment? What were they looking for? The next morning, I found another note, this one taped to the inside of my front door. Final warning, it read. Stop. My hands shook as I tore it down. I knew I was in danger, but I couldn't stop now. I was too close to the truth. I decided to confront the management company in person. I took the subway across town to their office, a nondescript building with tinted windows and no signage. The lobby was empty, the receptionist's desk abandoned. I rang the bell, but no one came. I waited for nearly an hour, but the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. I left, feeling more frustrated than ever. It was as if the company didn't exist, as if the building was being run by ghosts. I started to wonder if I was the only real person left, if everyone else was just playing a part in some elaborate performance. That night, I made a decision. I was going back to the basement. I needed to know what was behind that metal door, what secrets the cameras were hiding. I packed a flashlight, my journal, and a small screwdriver, just in case. I waited until the building was quiet, then slipped out of my apartment and down the stairs. The stairwell was colder than usual, the air thick with the scent of old paint and something metallic. Each step echoed, a hollow sound that seemed to stretch down into the dark. I paused at the landing, listening for any sign of movement, but the building was silent. The only sound was the distant hum of the city, muffled by concrete and steel. I reached the basement door and found it locked again, but this time I was prepared. I pulled the small screwdriver from my pocket and worked it into the latch, careful not to make too much noise. The lock was old, the metal worn smooth by years of use. After a few tense minutes, it gave way with a soft click. I slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind me. The basement was even darker than before. The single bulb flickered overhead, casting long, shifting shadows across the floor. I moved slowly, flashlight in hand, following the sound of the clicking relay. It was louder now, more urgent, as if the building itself was warning me away. I reached the metal door at the far end of the room and pressed my ear against it. The voices were back, clearer this time. I could make out fragments of conversation, words like protocol, containment, and exposure. My heart pounded in my chest. I tried the handle, but it was still locked. I considered knocking, but fear held me back. Instead, I searched the walls for another way in. I found a small vent near the floor, just large enough to crawl through. I hesitated, then dropped to my knees and pried the cover off. The metal screeched, echoing through the basement. I froze, waiting for footsteps, but none came. I crawled through the vent, the metal cold against my skin. The air inside was stale, filled with dust and the faint scent of mildew. I moved slowly, careful not to make a sound. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the other side and peered through the grate. The room beyond was filled with monitors, each one displaying a different camera feed. I saw the lobby, the hallways, the laundry room, even the inside of my own apartment. A group of people stood around a table, their faces obscured by masks. They spoke in low voices, their words muffled by the hum of the machines. I strained to listen, catching fragments of their conversation. "Subject is aware," one said. "Escalation required," another replied. "We can't risk exposure. Not after last time." My blood ran cold. They were talking about me. I watched as one of them pulled up a feed from my apartment. The image was crystal clear, every detail of my life laid bare. I saw myself pacing the living room, writing in my journal, staring up at the camera. I felt a wave of nausea. I wanted to scream, to smash the monitors, to make it stop. But I stayed quiet, forcing myself to listen. One of the masked figures turned to the others. "We need to initiate phase 2, they said. "If the subject continues to investigate, we'll have to relocate." The others nodded, their faces unreadable behind the masks. I realized then that I was in over my head. This wasn't just about surveillance. There was something bigger at play, something dangerous. I needed to get out, to warn someone, anyone, before it was too late. I backed away from the grate, careful not to make a sound. I crawled back through the vent, my heart racing. When I emerged in the basement, I replaced the cover and slipped out the door, locking it behind me. I ran up the stairs, 2 at a time, not stopping until I reached my apartment. Inside, I locked the door and collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. My mind raced with questions. Who were those people? What was phase 2? And what had happened last time? I knew I couldn't stay in the apartment. I packed a bag with the essentials, my journal, my laptop, a change of clothes. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my landlord was running a secret surveillance operation? That masked figures were plotting something in the basement? It sounded insane. Instead, I called my friend Alex. I hadn't spoken to him in months, but he was the only person I trusted. I told him I needed a place to stay, just for a few days. He didn't ask questions, just gave me his address and told me to come over. I left the apartment just after midnight, slipping out the back entrance to avoid the cameras. The city felt different, colder, as if the surveillance had followed me outside. I kept my head down, moving quickly through the empty streets. When I reached Alex's place, he was waiting for me at the door. He took one look at my face and ushered me inside. I told him everything, the cameras, the notes, the basement, the masked figures. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. "You need to go to the police," he said finally. "This is serious. You can't handle this on your own." I shook my head. "They'll think I'm crazy. I don't have any proof. Just my word and a bunch of notes." Alex nodded slowly. Then we get proof. We go back, together. We record everything. If they're really doing what you say, we'll have evidence. Enough to make someone listen. I hesitated, fear warring with relief. I didn't want to go back, but I knew he was right. I couldn't run forever. I needed answers. I needed to know why they had installed cameras in my apartment, and what they were really watching for. We spent the next day preparing. Alex dug out an old camcorder from his closet, the kind with night vision and a battery that could last for hours. He handed me a small audio recorder and a flashlight, and we mapped out a plan. We'd wait until after midnight, when the building was quiet, and sneak back in through the service entrance. If we were lucky, the maintenance staff would be gone, and the cameras in the common areas would be less likely to catch us. All day, I felt the weight of dread pressing down on me. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. I kept expecting another message, another warning, but my inbox stayed empty. It was almost worse than the notes, like the silence itself was a threat. When midnight came, we dressed in dark clothes and made our way to my building. The city was hushed, the streets empty except for the occasional cab. We slipped in through the alley, using the code I'd memorized for the service door. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cleaning chemicals and old carpet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly green glow. We moved quickly, keeping to the shadows. I led Alex down the back stairs to the basement, my heart pounding with every step. The door was locked, but I managed to pick it open with the screwdriver, my hands shaking. We slipped inside, closing the door behind us. The basement was even darker than before. The single bulb flickered overhead, casting long, shifting shadows. We moved quietly, the only sound our footsteps on the concrete floor. I led Alex to the metal door at the far end, the one with the vent I'd crawled through before. We listened. The clicking relay was gone, replaced by a low, steady hum. I pressed my ear to the door, but heard nothing. Alex tried the handle, but it was still locked. He nodded at the vent. "That's our way in," he whispered. I pried the cover off, the metal screeching in the silence. Alex went first, crawling through the narrow space with the camcorder strapped to his chest. I followed, clutching the audio recorder and flashlight. The air inside was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. We reached the other side and peered through the grate. The room beyond was empty, the monitors dark. The table was covered in papers, and a single laptop glowed in the center. We waited, listening for any sign of movement, but the building was silent. Alex pushed the grate open and slipped into the room. I followed, my heart racing. We moved quickly, searching the table for anything that might explain what was happening. The papers were covered in technical diagrams, lists of names and numbers, schedules for observation cycles. I snapped photos with my phone, my hands shaking. Alex booted up the laptop, his fingers flying over the keys. "There's a password," he whispered. I handed him the audio recorder, and he plugged it into the laptop's USB port. "Let's see if they're dumb enough to leave anything unencrypted." While he worked, I scanned the monitors. Most were dark, but one flickered to life, showing a live feed of the lobby. Another showed the hallway outside my apartment. I felt a chill run down my spine. They were still watching. Alex cursed under his breath. They wiped most of the files, but I found something in the recycle bin. He pulled up a folder labeled Incident Reports. Inside were dozens of documents, each one detailing a different subject. Some were marked Relocated, others Terminated. My name was on the list, highlighted in red. I scrolled through the reports, my stomach twisting. Each one described a different tenant, strange behavior, unauthorized access, attempts to disable cameras. The language was clinical, detached, as if we were lab rats instead of people. One report caught my eye, Subject 14, attempted to access restricted area. Escalation protocol initiated. Subject relocated within 48 hours. I looked at Alex, fear in my eyes. "What does relocated mean?" He shook his head. "I don't know. But I don't think it's good." We copied everything we could onto a flash drive, then slipped back through the vent. As we crawled out into the basement, we heard footsteps above us, heavy, deliberate, moving toward the stairs. We froze, holding our breath, as the footsteps grew louder. The basement door creaked open, and a beam of light swept across the floor. We pressed ourselves against the wall, hidden in the shadows. The light moved past us, then stopped. I heard a voice, low and distorted. "Check the room. Make sure nothing's missing." We waited, hearts pounding, as the footsteps moved into the surveillance room. The light flickered through the vent, illuminating the dust motes in the air. I heard the sound of papers rustling, the click of a keyboard. Then the voice again, "They were here. Find them." Alex grabbed my arm, and we slipped out of the basement, moving as quietly as we could. We took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting out into the alley. We didn't stop running until we reached his apartment, lungs burning, adrenaline surging through our veins. Inside, we locked the door and collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. Alex plugged the flash drive into his laptop and started copying the files. I sat beside him, staring at the screen, trying to process what we'd found. The reports were damning, proof that the management company was running a secret surveillance operation, targeting tenants who asked too many questions. The language was cold, clinical, but the meaning was clear. Anyone who got too close to the truth was relocated. Anyone who resisted was terminated. I felt a wave of nausea. I thought about Mrs. Patel, about the neighbors who had disappeared without a word. I wondered how many others had been relocated, how many had simply vanished. Alex looked at me, his face pale. "We have to go to the police. This is bigger than we thought." I nodded, but a part of me wondered if it would make any difference. If the people behind the cameras had this much power, who was to say they didn't have friends in law enforcement? But I knew we had to try. We couldn't let them get away with this. We barely slept that night. Every sound outside Alex's window made us flinch. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another anonymous message, but the screen stayed dark. At dawn, we gathered our evidence, photos, files, the audio recorder, and made our way to the nearest police station. The city was waking up, but I felt like I was moving through a different world, one where every stranger on the street might be watching, listening, reporting back. The desk sergeant listened to our story with a skeptical frown. He took the flash drive and scrolled through the files, his eyes narrowing as he read. When we showed him the incident reports, he called over a detective, a woman with tired eyes and a badge clipped to her belt. She listened quietly, asking pointed questions, her pen moving quickly across a notepad. "Do you have any proof these reports are real?" she asked. "Anyone else who can corroborate your story?" I shook my head, feeling the weight of doubt settle on my shoulders. "My neighbors, some of them are gone. I don't know where. And the management company, no one ever answers. It's like they're not real." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "We'll look into it. In the meantime, I suggest you stay somewhere safe. Don't go back to your apartment." She handed us a card with her direct number. "If you see anything suspicious, call me. Day or night." We left the station feeling both relieved and unsettled. We'd done what we could, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. The people behind the cameras were still out there, still watching. And now they knew we were onto them. Back at Alex's apartment, we tried to relax, but every knock at the door made us jump. I kept replaying the events of the past week in my mind, searching for anything I'd missed. The cameras, the notes, the masked figures in the basement, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. That afternoon, Alex's phone rang. It was the detective. "We sent a unit to your building," she said. "The management office is empty. No records, no files, nothing. It's like they packed up overnight." My stomach dropped. "What about the surveillance room? The basement?" There was a pause. "We found the room, but it's been wiped clean. No monitors, no papers, nothing. Just an empty space." I felt a wave of despair. They were gone. Whoever had been running the operation had vanished, leaving no trace behind. I wondered how many other buildings they'd watched, how many other tenants had disappeared. That night, I dreamed of cameras, endless rows of them, their lenses turning to follow me wherever I went. I woke in a cold sweat, the word relocated echoing in my mind. The next day, Alex and I tried to piece together what we knew. We went through the files again, looking for anything we'd missed. One document caught my eye, a list of addresses, each one marked with a code. My building was on the list, along with a dozen others across the city. Some were marked inactive, others active. I realized with a jolt that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of something much bigger. We mapped out the addresses, trying to find a pattern. Most were apartment buildings, but a few were office towers, hotels, even a hospital. I wondered how many people were being watched, how many had no idea their every move was being recorded. Alex suggested we visit one of the other buildings, see if the cameras were there too. I hesitated, fear gnawing at my gut, but I knew he was right. We couldn't stop now. We needed answers. We chose a building on the other side of the city, one marked active on the list. It was a nondescript high-rise, identical to 100 others. We walked the halls, looking for signs of surveillance. At first, everything seemed normal. But then I spotted it, a small black dome in the corner of the ceiling, identical to the ones in my apartment. I felt a chill run down my spine. We tried to talk to the tenants, but most were wary, unwilling to speak. One woman, her eyes darting nervously, whispered, "They watch everything. Don't ask questions." She hurried away before we could say more. We left the building, our suspicions confirmed. The operation was still active, still watching. We called the detective and told her what we'd found. She promised to send a team, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. That night, we made a decision. We would go public. We would take our story to the media, show them the evidence, force the city to pay attention. It was risky, but we had no other choice. We spent hours drafting an email, attaching the files, the photos, the audio recordings. We sent it to every news outlet we could think of, from local papers to national networks. Then we waited, hearts pounding, hoping someone would listen. The first response came the next morning. A reporter from a local station wanted to meet, to see the evidence for herself. We agreed, arranging to meet in a crowded cafe downtown. She listened to our story, her eyes wide with disbelief. When we showed her the files, she grew pale. "This is huge," she whispered. "If this is real, it's the story of the year." She promised to look into it, to verify the documents, to talk to other tenants. We left the cafe feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. But that night, as we sat in Alex's apartment, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, then silence. We froze, exchanging a glance. I crept to the peephole and looked out. The hallway was empty, but a slip of paper lay on the floor. I picked it up, my hands shaking. It was blank, except for a single word in block letters, "Enough." The word on the paper echoed in my mind long after I closed the door. Enough. It was a threat, a warning, or maybe just a statement of fact. I showed it to Alex, and he frowned, his jaw tight. "They know we're not stopping," he said quietly. "They're getting desperate." We tried to sleep, but every sound in the hallway made us tense. I kept thinking about the other buildings, the other tenants, the ones who hadn't been as lucky as us. I wondered if they'd gotten notes like this, if they'd tried to fight back, or if they'd just disappeared without a trace. The next morning, the reporter called. Her voice was tense, urgent. "I need you to come to the station. Now. Bring everything." She wouldn't say more over the phone, but I could hear the fear in her voice. We packed up our evidence and took a cab across town, watching the rearview mirror for any sign we were being followed. At the station, the reporter met us at the door and ushered us inside. She led us to a small conference room, where a producer and a security guard waited. She closed the door and turned to us, her face pale. "Someone broke into my apartment last night," she said. "They didn't take anything, but they left this." She slid a slip of paper across the table. It was identical to the one we'd received, "Enough." The producer leaned forward, his voice low. "We believe you. We've started looking into the management company, but it's like they don't exist. No business records, no tax filings, nothing. Whoever's behind this, they're good at covering their tracks." Alex pulled out the flash drive and handed it over. "Everything we have is on here. Incident reports, surveillance schedules, lists of buildings. We need to get this out before they disappear for good." The reporter nodded. "We're going to run the story. Tonight. But you need to be careful. If they know you're talking to us, they might try to silence you." We left the station with a mix of relief and dread. The story was out of our hands now, but that didn't mean we were safe. If anything, we were more exposed than ever. That afternoon, the detective called. "We've had reports of other tenants going missing," she said. "People who asked too many questions, who tried to disable the cameras. We're treating this as a criminal investigation now. I need you to stay somewhere safe." We checked into a cheap motel on the edge of the city, paying cash and using fake names. The room was small and dingy, but it felt safer than anywhere else. We kept the curtains closed and the lights off, watching the news on a battered old TV. That night, the story broke. The reporter stood in front of my building, microphone in hand, her voice steady but urgent. She described the secret surveillance operation, the missing tenants, the management company that didn't exist. She showed the files, the photos, the incident reports. She interviewed other tenants, some of whom broke down in tears on camera. The story spread quickly, picked up by other stations, then by national networks. Social media exploded with outrage and fear. People demanded answers, demanded justice. The city promised an investigation, the police promised protection, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. The people behind the cameras were still out there, still watching. The next morning, we woke to a pounding on the motel door. Alex grabbed the camcorder, and I peered through the peephole. It was the detective, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. We let them in, and she closed the door behind her, her face grim. "You need to come with us," she said. "We've found something. And I think you need to see it." We followed her to an unmarked car and drove across the city, weaving through traffic as sirens wailed in the distance. She didn't speak, her hands tight on the wheel. We pulled up outside a warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, its windows boarded up, its walls covered in graffiti. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old machinery. The detective led us through a maze of corridors to a locked door. She unlocked it and stepped aside, letting us enter first. The room beyond was filled with monitors, just like the surveillance room in my building. But these were bigger, newer, arranged in neat rows along the walls. Each screen showed a different building, a different set of tenants. Some were asleep, some were eating dinner, some were staring up at the cameras, their faces pale with fear. In the center of the room was a table covered in files. The detective picked one up and handed it to me. It was a dossier, thick with photos and reports. My name was on the cover, along with Alex's and the reporters. Inside were surveillance photos, transcripts of our conversations, even copies of the notes we'd received. "They've been watching you for months," the detective said quietly. "Longer than you realized." I felt a wave of nausea. I thought about every moment I'd spent in my apartment, every private conversation, every secret I thought was safe. It was all here, catalogued and analyzed, part of some vast, invisible machine. Alex flipped through the files, his hands shaking. "How many people are on these lists?" he asked. The detective shook her head. "Hundreds. Maybe thousands. We're still going through everything. But it's clear this wasn't just about you. This was a citywide operation." We spent hours in the warehouse, combing through the evidence. The scale of it was staggering, dozens of buildings, hundreds of tenants, all watched, all catalogued, all at risk. The files were filled with codes and jargon, references to containment protocols and escalation procedures. It was clear the people behind the cameras had planned for every possibility. As the sun set, the detective turned to us. "We're going to need your help. You know more about this than anyone. If we're going to stop them, we need to work together." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of resolve. I was scared, but I wasn't alone anymore. We had the truth on our side. And for the first time, I believed we might actually win. The next few days blurred together in a haze of interviews, meetings, and sleepless nights. The detective set us up in a safe house, a nondescript apartment on the edge of the city, guarded by plainclothes officers. We spent our days poring over files, helping the task force piece together the scope of the surveillance network. Every new discovery made the operation seem more sinister, more calculated. There were blueprints for hidden camera installations, lists of target behaviors, and even psychological profiles of tenants deemed high risk. The media storm only grew. News vans lined the street outside my old building, reporters clamoring for statements from anyone who would talk. The city's mayor held a press conference, promising a full investigation and vowing to bring those responsible to justice. But the management company remained a ghost, no executives, no employees, no trace of who was really in charge. Alex and I were interviewed by every major network. We told our story over and over, each time hoping it would be the last. The detective warned us to be careful, to watch what we said, but we knew the truth had to come out. The more people who knew, the harder it would be for the operation to simply vanish again. One night, as we sat in the safe house, Alex turned to me, his face drawn and tired. "Do you ever wonder why us?" he asked. "Why our building? Why you?" I thought about it for a long time. Maybe it was random. Maybe I just asked too many questions. Or maybe they were looking for something. Someone who wouldn't just accept it. He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "I keep thinking about the others. The ones who disappeared. What if we're just the ones who got lucky?" I didn't have an answer. The files were full of names, faces, stories that ended abruptly with words like relocated or terminated. I wondered how many families were still searching for loved ones, how many people had vanished without a trace. The detective called us into the station the next morning. She looked more exhausted than ever, her eyes ringed with dark circles. "We've made progress," she said. "We traced some of the equipment purchases to a shell company. It's international, money moving through a dozen countries, all designed to hide the real owners. But we found something else, too." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos of a man in a suit, his face blurred in every shot. He's been seen at several of the buildings. Always just before a new round of cameras goes in. We think he's the one running things on the ground. Alex leaned forward. "Do you have a name?" The detective shook her head. "Not yet. But we're close. We have teams watching the other buildings, waiting for him to show up again. When he does, we'll be ready." The next few days were tense. We stayed inside, only leaving for meetings with the task force. Every time the phone rang, my heart leapt into my throat. I kept expecting bad news, a new disappearance, a setback in the investigation. But slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. One afternoon, the detective called with an update. "We got him," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "He showed up at one of the buildings on your list. We picked him up as he was leaving. He's in custody now." We rushed to the station, adrenaline surging. The man sat in an interrogation room, his hands cuffed to the table. He was calm, almost bored, his eyes cold and flat. The detective questioned him for hours, but he said little. When she pressed him about the cameras, the missing tenants, the files, he just smiled. "You think you've stopped something," he said finally, his voice low and even. "But you haven't. There are other buildings. Other cities. You can't watch everyone." The detective leaned in, her voice hard. "We're going to find them. All of them. And you're going to help us." He just shrugged, as if it didn't matter. "You can try. But you'll never find them all." Afterward, the detective met us in the hallway. "He's not talking. But we have enough to charge him. And with the evidence you found, we can start shutting down the rest of the network." It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for. There was no dramatic confession, no neat resolution. But it was a start. That night, Alex and I sat on the balcony of the safe house, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The cameras were gone. The people behind them were being hunted, exposed. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but we'd made a difference. I thought about my old apartment, about the life I'd left behind. I wondered if I'd ever feel safe in my own home again, if I'd ever stop looking over my shoulder. But I knew one thing for sure, I would never ignore that feeling again. I would never let anyone tell me I was just being paranoid. Alex raised his glass, a tired smile on his face. "To the ones who watch back," he said. I clinked my glass against his, the city stretching out before us, full of secrets and shadows. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The days that followed felt strangely empty, as if the adrenaline that had fueled me for so long had finally burned out, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. The city moved on, as cities always do, but I found myself caught between relief and unease. The news cycle churned, the headlines faded, and soon the story of the hidden cameras was just another cautionary tale, a warning whispered in the hallways of apartment buildings and office towers. But for me, for Alex, and for the others who had lived under that silent gaze, nothing would ever be quite the same. The detective kept in touch, updating us as the investigation spread. More buildings were uncovered, more shell companies dissolved, more victims found. Some came forward, their stories eerily similar to mine: strange emails, missing neighbors, the sense of being watched. Others were never found at all, their names just lines in a file, their fates unknown. The man in the suit refused to talk, and the deeper the task force dug, the more they realized how vast the network truly was. It wasn't just our city. It wasn't even just our country. The web stretched across continents, a shadow infrastructure built on secrecy and fear. Alex and I tried to reclaim some sense of normalcy. He went back to work, though he changed his locks and covered every camera in his apartment, just in case. I found a new place, a small studio on the other side of town, in a building that still used old-fashioned keys and had no security system at all. The first night I slept there, I lay awake for hours, listening to the creaks and groans of the pipes, the distant rumble of traffic. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden lens, every silence a threat. But slowly, the fear faded, replaced by a cautious hope. I started writing again, not just in my journal but for others, blog posts, op-eds, interviews. I wanted people to know what had happened, to understand that privacy isn't just a right, but a necessity. I spoke at community meetings, warning tenants to trust their instincts, to ask questions, to demand transparency from those in power. The city council passed new laws, requiring landlords to disclose all surveillance equipment, to obtain written consent from tenants. It wasn't enough, not really, but it was a start. Sometimes, I'd see someone on the street, a stranger with a familiar walk, a face I couldn't quite place, and I'd wonder if they were part of it, if the network was still out there, watching, waiting. But I refused to let paranoia rule my life. I learned to look people in the eye again, to trust, if only a little. One evening, months after it all began, I got a call from Mrs. Patel. Her voice was shaky, but determined. "I saw you on the news," she said. "Thank you for not giving up." We talked for a long time, sharing stories, piecing together the fragments of what we'd both endured. She told me about the night she almost left, about the fear that kept her silent. "I thought I was alone," she whispered. "But I wasn't, was I?" "No," I told her. "None of us were." The detective called, too, sometimes late at night, her voice tired but resolute. She told me about the progress they were making, about the new leads, the new victims coming forward. "It's not over," she said. "But we're getting closer. Every day." Alex and I met up often, sometimes just to sit in silence, sometimes to talk about everything and nothing. We both knew we'd never be the same, that the scars of what we'd seen would never fully heal. But we also knew we'd done something important. We'd fought back. We'd refused to be silent. One night, as we sat on the roof of his building, watching the city lights flicker in the darkness, Alex turned to me. "Do you ever wish you'd never found out?" he asked. I thought about it for a long time. About the fear, the sleepless nights, the sense of violation. But also about the people we'd helped, the lives we'd changed, the truth we'd uncovered. "No," I said finally. "I don't. I wish it had never happened. But I'm glad we fought. I'm glad we didn't let them win." He nodded, a small smile on his lips. "Me too." As the months passed, the city slowly returned to normal. The buildings were inspected, the cameras removed, the management companies replaced. But the memory lingered, a quiet reminder that safety is never guaranteed, that vigilance is the price we pay for freedom. I still check my apartment for cameras sometimes, still flinch when I see a black dome in a corner store or a hotel lobby. But I also remember the strength I found, the friends I made, the courage it took to stand up and say, "Enough." I remember that even in the darkest moments, we are never truly alone. And sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and the world feels safe, I think about the people who are still out there, still watching, still waiting. I hope they know that we're watching back now, that we're not afraid to speak out, to fight, to demand the privacy and dignity we all deserve. Because in the end, that's what it comes down to, not just cameras in the ceiling or files in a basement, but the simple, stubborn refusal to be silenced. The belief that our lives are our own, that our stories matter, that we have the right to live unobserved, unafraid. So if you ever find yourself wondering if you're being watched, if you ever feel that prickle on the back of your neck, trust it. Ask questions. Demand answers. And remember, you are not alone. There are others out there, others who have fought, others who have won. And if you ever find a camera in your apartment, if you ever get a note slipped under your door, remember this story. Remember that the truth is worth fighting for. Remember that even in the face of fear, you can choose to resist. Because sometimes, the only way to reclaim your life is to look back at the ones who are watching, and let them know you see them, too.